I still think that there is a lot that is out there, though, that is still to be found.
Greetings and welcome to the Unrefined Podcast. I am Brandon Spain, your host on this journey through the mysterious, the unexplained, and the supernatural, all viewed through the lens of biblical truth. Connect with us and gain access to exclusive content at unrefinedpodcast.com. Now, for this week's episode. Hey, you guys. This week we are delving into the topic of archaeology in South America and Peru specifically. We're thrilled to welcome the adventurous mind behind the Pillars of the Past, a YouTube channel dedicated to uncovering the mysteries of ancient history. As a researcher and explorer based in Peru, he takes viewers on a journey to newly discovered and forgotten ancient sites, offering a front row seat to pure adventure. His mission is to document, investigate, and preserve the legacy of these awe-inspiring locations, blending academic rigor with alternate perspectives. Whether revisiting well-known landmarks with fresh eyes or shedding light on sites long lost to time, his thoughtful analysis and engaging storytelling awaken the explorer in all of us. Welcome, Raul, to our show.
It's great to be here. Thank you. And thank you for that. That was very, very well said. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, let's start off with this. Tell us your journey. How did you get into this and how did you get to where you are now?
Well, great question. My history runs deep with Peru. I have, my mother is actually from Peru. And so she met my dad here in the States, and my dad would go visit her family before I was born. And then eventually when I was born, I mean, my dad just fell in love with Peru. And so I would end up going there every year and a half or so as a kid, and my tia and tios and my abuelita, we still have family down there. And my dad never lost his adventurous spirit. So growing up, I have all these home videos from the 80s and 90s of just traveling to all the sites from the coast up into the Andes and then down into the Amazon. And that really made me fall in love with archaeology. There was one moment, I actually have it on my website, pillarsofthepast.com. I was going through the old family footage. So back in the day, when you were at these sites, there weren't, I mean, now you go to Machu Picchu and you got to stick to a certain path, and they rush you because there's time tickets and everything like that. But back in the day, you could just kind of go wherever. And so
Back in the day would be like 80s. Are you a Gen X like we are? Yeah.
Late 80s, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, well, this would have been in the 90s.
Okay.
I remember I was just wandering around because you had all the time in the world there, and I found some little cave inside one of the structures at Machu Picchu, and I saw something shiny in the mud. So I started digging at it, and I found seashells when I was up at 8,000 feet, and that as a kid blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I always kind of held on to that in the background, and eventually throughout the next several decades, my independent research, I would learn about the cataclysmic shifts in the Earth's past and how things were a lot different. And so that fueled the research side. And then recently going to Peru, and I found that not much has changed since. I mean, now at the main sites things have changed, but as far as the vast majority of ancient sites in Peru, they don't get a lot of attention, if anything, unless it's a big site that's going to bring tourism. There's not much you can find on it. And so I took it upon myself to try to identify, go locate, and document these sites.
Yeah. So what is the major Native American tribe down in Peru? I know there's a bunch, but
there's a couple, but I would say, in the indigenous groups, it's the Quechua people.
Quechua, okay.
Yeah, predominantly, yes.
Yeah. So most of the Peruvians, that's their line of ancestry is through that particular group most.
Typically, and especially up into the Andes, and then in towns like Cusco and places like Chavin, when you're starting the ascent up into the Andes. But there are different indigenous groups. Again, I don't know the names of all of them.
Right.
But that would be the most predominant
Yeah.
one. It was the Quechua who mainly encountered the Spanish when, being the Incas when they came.
Hmm.
Are they Aymara? I may be saying that
Yes,
wrong. Are they Quechuan, or are they
no,
okay, that's separate group?
that's
Okay.
separate, and that's more up in the Trujillo area. They are the descendants of the Moche peoples.
Yeah. Lindsay's our resident. And I'm
Whatever
not gonna
that
say you're
means.
I'm not gonna say you're an expert. I'm not, but he loves Native American stuff, both North and South America. So he geeks out on it, and it's so awesome because he always can contribute stuff like this. But so on your journey through archaeological stuff, there seems to be different camps and different areas where people do research and stuff. And I just wanted to ask you, like, just right up front, do you, and I don't know the exact names for these, I'm just going to say the gist of them. There is one camp that believes that primarily most of the people came over on the Siberian land bridge. And then there's another group which was more that it was spread out over an extended period of time with many different peoples. Which one of those camps are you in, per se?
Uh, I mean, that's a good question, and I think my stance on these things is, I love to follow the evidence personally,
Yeah.
but I think there's a lot of evidence we're kind of missing. And I think that there are a lot of indicators that suggest that a lot of what the current ideology is might be a little off, or there's some variation to it. And so, I mean, I personally believe a lot of people out there make some pretty good arguments and have done a lot of good research to connect the dots on the possibilities of alternative travel into the Americas. And most recently, it's things with the DNA studies that are comparing the haplogroups between the cultures in South America. They're matching up oddly enough to the peoples in Polynesia and then in the Asiatic world. So that's very interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And there's no reason for me personally, there's for as long as human beings have been around to think that they didn't come up with, like on the coast of Peru, for example, you have evidence of these cultures creating vast trade networks based on fishing. Like they weren't growing agriculture, they were fishing. And you think about it, yes, you can build people building nets and things of that nature, but to think you're around for thousands of years and not making a boat to go fish and then taking that boat to go see what else is around is a little hard. And the majority of that particular evidence we're probably not going to find.
Yeah.
I still think that there is a lot that is out there, though, that is still to be found. We're in a new age of technological exploration, the new gifts that technology is bringing with lidar and new advances in ground penetrating radar, things of that nature. I think we're on the cusp of another series of great discoveries, in my opinion, and I'd like to be a part of it.
Yeah, it might be like another Renaissance or type situation, another enlightenment, another turn. We were about due for one, I think. So yeah, technology is definitely changing how we do archaeology and anthropology. So yeah, I mean, we overall are sort of, and I don't like this terminology, but it's an identifier. We're kind of a fringy oriented type podcast, and we tend to go like the direction of like Graham Hancock and Ancient Aliens and some of that kind of stuff. I mean, not we don't directly, it's not direct correlation with him, but we agree with you. We really like a lot of the people that are coming out that are challenging the status quo. And so, are you in archaeological circles, or are you outside academia, or what?
I like to stay in both, to be quite
Yeah,
honest.
yeah,
I have all of Graham Hancock's books. I've been on Hancock since Fingerprints of the Gods, and
yeah,
before him, since John Anthony West and the Serpent in the Sky.
yeah,
I loved his Magical Egypt series, and but there's also some things like I don't buy into every little thing,
yeah, yeah,
and I think that's healthy. And I
mhm,
believe that what these authors and researchers and investigators have provided is a wealth of information that people can, at least that what I've done is I've taken, they've presented cases and arguments and named sites and peoples that I had no idea about. So using that as the jumping off place for my own research is, and then to formulate my own ideas, it happens naturally over time. And I think that they do good work. They present a lot of good arguments for the case they're trying to make. I personally just wish there was a little bit more evidence to start, solidifying things.
right, right.
which is why I'm hesitant to co-sign my own beliefs with some of the ones that have been presented.
Yeah. So these are basically just influences, which is good. I mean, we need influences from different places. That's really interesting to know. We have a scholar that we follow that BT's had on his show several times, Dr. Heather Lynn, and she's an archaeologist. That she calls herself the renegade archaeologist. And
nice,
but she's in academia, and she gets a lot of blowback from academia for really exploring a lot of the what we would call the outer limits or the edges, the liminality of stuff like that. And she finds a lot of evidence there too, which is really pretty amazing. But I'm with you. I would like to be balanced in the sense of I don't want to just speculate. A lot of people in our circles, it's just speculation. There needs to be some evidence to a lot of stuff, but they have some. And
well, and that's the thing. And I think speculation is great. I like to have a little foundation under the speculation, and I do think that there are, like I think Dr. Heather Lynn, there are several archaeologists. I mean, you have hardcore archaeologists who are just like, this is what we know and this is it.
Yeah.
But there's also a group that has a little bit more of an open mind, and but still, I mean, like I said, I spoke with Dr. Ed Barnhart recently, and Tom Dillahay, for example, with his sites in Peru and dating structures like Monteverde or in the bog sites, dating things in Monteverde, that got so much pushback, and now it's accepted.
Yeah.
And so, to quote Dr. Barnhart, archaeology moves at a glacial pace for paradigms to shift. And but I do feel that, look, the evidence is there, and thank goodness for the archaeologists that can kind of stand firm in the adversarial world that they're in with some of these, with some of the new data that's coming out.
I mean
Barnhart mentioned Anna Roosevelt in y'all's talk, and just a great man. She's really come up against it. Just she's not saying anything too crazy either. She just stuff she's found that indicates, hey, there's more to the cultures and further back, even in the Amazon here, than people are willing to admit. We need to look into that. And man, she was in the 1491 Charles C. Mann's book, and I'd never heard. She's descended from Teddy Roosevelt, and she's an archaeologist, and I'd never heard of her. It really blew my mind.
Well, and on the note, I mean, she's out there doing grueling, rigorous work. The unsexy archaeology of being in the trenches. And I was listening to a podcast the other day, and one of the gentlemen brought up what I thought was a pretty good point, that a lot of the academic world, they're invested. I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff here. There's a lot of investment in the narrative and the evidence that's been currently presented. People have written books on these things. Students have to buy these books. There's a lot of that's involved, and so to kind of change that up might throw a wrench in a whole lot of things. And a snowball will roll. And so, but at the end of the day, like Anna Roosevelt and Tom Dillahay, these people who stand firm with their evidence in the face of all of this, continue to do the work, and then little by little, the evidence speaks for itself.
Yeah,
which is great. But the fact that there's so much pushback is a really unsettling.
Yeah, not to be conspiratorial, but it almost seems suspicious. Some of the pushback. What is the real agenda? It's money, obviously, but there could be other things too, and. Of course, now we're getting into speculation or whatever. I don't want to go there. So tell us about your work in Peru and what you've seen and what you're thirsty to find out more information. And so what is it that you're really like thirsty to find?
I would say, well, just to give a little backstory to to things that have happened. We're having this conversation here, and I started my channel about less than a year ago. It's less than a year old. And what initially happened was last Christmas, I was down in Peru, and we had done the Christmas thing. I think it was the 26th, it was the day after or something. And there was a lot of downtime. And I just remembered I'd been using Google Earth for a long time, just combing through Peru and marking off what I thought looked like ancient ruins. And these were places that didn't have any markers, any place markers or labels or anything of that nature on them. was like, this kind of looks like an ancient ruin. So I marked them off. And when I had that downtime, I put one of them in my GPS, and I was like, all right, that's 2 hours away. I can try to make it. Well, it was a lot longer than 2 hours because you're on these roads that aren't roads and trying to make it out into these valleys. And I was right. It wasn't an archaeological site. There wasn't any Ministry of Culture designation, but they were ancient ruins. And then the next day, I did it again with another site, and I was like, all right, it's 2 for 2. And then I came back to the States, and I posted it, and it kind of really took off. Much bigger than I could have ever thought, which was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then so I posted a lot of the further research I had done on a lot of other sites. Well, that culminated in May of 2024, and I went down, and in 3 weeks, I made it to 90 locations I had mapped out. I drove for over 3,000 kilometers up and down the coast looking for these places. I was in the desert, in these fertile valleys. I was climbing over mountains. And I can say that out of the 90 sites that were unlabeled and unmarked on any sort of maps, my accuracy, I'm shocked still, but my accuracy rating is 100% to this day. So
wow.
far,
Now, I've always heard that there are no straight lines in nature. So if you're looking at a map and you see straight lines, that's a immediate like green light that it can be something. Is that pretty much how it can be?
Well, I will say nature will shock you.
Really?
There are some, like there's, I was speaking to a geologist recently about some stones that I could have sworn were, and she has her opinion. I have mine. I'm not a geologist though. So,
right.
And I like to, she's the only one I've spoken to so far, but she was very adamant that some of the stone construction that I found at one particular location was more likely than not natural. And so things like that can happen.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah.
And so I marked out all these sites. Now, a majority of them ended up having Ministry of Culture designations on them. So it's these big blue signs that say, so the government knows about it. They're just not on any maps. There's a handful of locations I found that didn't have any of that. They didn't have any survey sticks or any indications that archaeologists had ever been there before. There was one thing that was present at each and every one of these sites, and that was looting pits, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There wasn't a single site without something had been looted. But even those sites that had Ministry of Culture designations, again, I was speaking with Dr. Barnhart, and a lot of these locations, people were exploring back in the early 1900s and 1920s, and even into the 70s, and so they'll comb through these areas and find a site, find some bones, try to date something, mark it down, and then that's it. That's it. So it's been 100 years for some of those sites, and they just kind of got glanced at and written down. So to answer your question, for any of the known locations, and by known, I mean, still, even though the Ministry of Culture knows about them, you're not finding them on any maps. When I came back to the States, I like to do my research on these sites and find peer-reviewed papers or what have academics published, and I can't find anything on most of these. And so what I think would be a worthwhile venture is like that site of Huaca Prieta. It was initially dated to 3000 BCE. And then it was dated to 6000 BCE. Well, then Tom Dillahay said, okay, well, we took samples from this part of the structure. But that's all they did is take samples from this part of the structure. Why didn't they do it back here? So he went back and did it. And now it dates back between 14,000 and 18,000 years ago. And I can only imagine at all these other sites, what's been overlooked? What kind of just got the once over?
Yeah.
And that's really and the reason behind that is because I personally believe some of this stuff is a lot older than it's currently noted as.
Well, that makes a lot of sense if you think about in the Middle East when they built on top of a city, built on top of a city, built on, and if you just do a cursory investigation, like you said, some of these possibly were, you're just going to go skin deep, so to speak. And there could be other older stuff in the layers.
Absolutely. Well, and beyond that, the fact of the matter is all these people who were exploring back in the day were treasure seekers.
Yeah.
And so these are the earliest sites. You don't find ceramics. You're not going to find, well smithed gold. And so, I mean, that's what happened at Corral. When they came through, they looked at it and they didn't even mark it as old as it was. They saw that it didn't have any carvings on the walls. There weren't any artifacts, so they just kind of kept it moving. And then it was Ruth Shady Solis, her work at the site. I mean, this turned out to be the oldest culture that we know about in Peru, building these stone temple um, structures. And that was overlooked for decades until somebody kind of sat down, did the unsexy work, and just had the thought, like, maybe, just maybe, there's something more here.
Well, we have new technology too that they didn't have in the early 1900s to really dive into it. Which this kind of leads into a segue of something I wanted to really kind of touch on is: do you think with your work in Peru that there you see an interconnectedness between other civilizations? I know you've talked about the being, Peru is a really interesting country. It doesn't it go it goes up the seashore basically on the western seashore. Like you said earlier, there has to be a seafaring aspect in there somewhere for these people. I mean, you don't live on the ocean for thousands of years and not go out in the water. So do you see any interconnectedness in some of these sites, like of other, I don't know what you'd say, other people groups?
It's part of my goal with the channel is to go back to some of the places that I made it to because they deserve. My last recent trip was more of a surveying
Yeah.
kind of production more than anything else. And so the time that I would like to spend at these sites to really kind of investigate and as far as things that I personally went to go, I think it needs a lot more time to try to look at the connections that you're alluding to. Now, with Peru being on the coast, Peru is a very unique country with its different environmental atmospheres. So you have the coastal deserts, and then you start the rise up into the Andes, and then you
Yeah.
come down from the Andes into the Amazon basin, and there's cultures that lived everywhere. I mean, everywhere down there. And so when you go back far enough, it's hard to make connections because when you go back far enough, there weren't carvings, there wasn't a system of writing that we know about, and so there weren't really ceramics, and so to make connections from the oldest of cultures can be pretty difficult.
Yeah.
Uh but then as the iconography starts to come about, and that was, kind of began around the Chavin culture, you start to see these threads being tied, especially throughout South America when it comes to some of the religious iconography and then the
Yeah.
beliefs of, and actually, it's Dr. Barnhart's work is
Yeah.
he's tracing this fanged deity that is coming all the way from the Amazon and kind of making its way up and down the coast.
Interesting.
And there is, with Anna Roosevelt's work, she's found the oldest pottery in the Americas, and that is on the Brazilian coast
Mm.
of the Atlantic. And then they're finding pottery deep in the Amazon that's 8,000 years old, and you can see it traced up through the Amazon into Ecuador. And then from there, it spreads up and down the coast, down in the coastal regions of South America, and then upwards towards Mesoamerica. So the fact that there's connections there. Some of the symbolism, some of the design work that you'll see a lot of times on the rims of pottery or along the edges of the
Like filigree,
textiles.
filigree or something like that, or
The Greeks had it too, which
yeah,
and so maybe that is the term. I'm unaware of that term,
yeah,
but you'll see that in Mesoamerica also with the Mayans, and so it's very curious.
Yeah, some of the
yeah,
hardest parts of dating Peru is they didn't their cultural technology didn't develop the same way that we see in other civilizations. So we have to look at their material culture in the cave systems of the upper Andes. And that basically leads archaeologists to go, oh, there was nobody here before, before 8000 BC. And then that's where they're stuck, because you take an honest look at the material culture left behind, and you're left with that, because you're something like pottery sherds and things like that is a little bit easier to date. But if you're just pulling out and looking at reed sandals, you're kind of having a hard time judging exactly how old something really is.
yeah,
This actually, on I was doing research on on my videos on Sexe Woman, and I didn't even know this until I went on this deep dive that I went just some twists and turns. I have no idea how I got to the places I got.
I
But
want to ask you more about that. Yeah, yeah,
right on.
yeah.
But in that process, I found out that there's petroglyphs up by Machu Picchu, all around Machu Picchu. I had no idea. Hiram Bingham, who rediscovered Machu, wrote about them, and they're there. They don't point them out on tours at all. I was there recently for a tour, and this was from a peer-reviewed paper back in 2017. I had never. I mean, I grew up going to Peru. I'd never heard of that, and so for me personally, what that spoke to was, uh, what you brought up earlier about kind of sites being repurposed and reoccupied over time. I believe in that, and whether it's because the location was simply the most idyllic, or it was a way of paying homage or some sort of reverence to the culture that was the antecedent culture. But for me, learning that about the petroglyphs at one of the sacred sites, like, makes sense. Makes sense that if people were repopulating these areas, and there was this idea of venerating the peoples who came before them,
Hmm.
it would make sense to me to build in those locations.
There'd be an oral
Sure.
tradition about that too. We find that in the the Indian peoples of North America, where there'll be an oral tradition as to why series of peoples would die out, and then why other peoples would take other places. And there was a really common thing in the basin, like the Eastern Oregon basins. We have this where we have a story of a giant. He'd go and he would use his stick and stab and kill people around the fires. And I mean, that's a story on how to tell where people went and why we died out for a period of time and why we're here now again. And you have all of those stories. So you would have an oral tradition in Peru, I would assume, amongst the indigenous.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now the thing is, though, with I feel I find I've found in a lot of cultures is, at some point throughout the historical timeline, a lot of these oral traditions are written down
Yes.
somewhere,
Yep.
not in Peru. And that's the problem, because Peru does not have a writing system that we know, which is really shocking to believe. You have these cultures that exist all over the world that are these cradles of civilization that have writing,
Yeah.
but all of this one in South America, this massive series of cultures
Yeah.
don't have writing at all.
Well, they were late on the pottery. Remember, not till 1000 BC do we find pottery in Peru.
Well, and so here's the newest research is suggesting that they're doing studies at Harvard. They're actually trying to use AI to kind of crack some of this. Is the Khipus,
Yeah.
the Khipus, and the old, which we know as an old accounting system.
Yeah.
However, it's even written in the Spanish chronicles that they would, I think it was called the Quipu Kamayaks, and they were the ones who could read the Quipus, and they actually shipped a few of them over to Spain, and they had some sort of presentation with the royalty of Spain, and you had these Quipu Kamayaks reading stories from these Quipus.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what the Spanish did is the Spanish burned every Quipu they could find and murdered every single Quipu Kamayak. So they literally wiped out anybody who could read those things. And I did speak to Dr. Barnhart about this. I heard him say it from in something else, but there was an indigenous culture that said they knew they had retained the knowledge of reading these Quipus, but unfortunately, they recently found out that they were lying. So we still don't know what. And so going back to the oral traditions, yes, they are there, and yes, they go back a ways. But in other cultures around the world, the fact that they've been written down has preserved them a little bit better, in my opinion. I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. You made a statement earlier that you said that your initial investigations in some of these areas are just strictly cursory and not very deep yet. So, what is your plan to go into to go deeper in these situations in these regions?
Well, although I'm half Peruvian, it is the national patrimony of the country of Peru to do what they will or allow whatever they would like to happen at these sites, and that needs to be respected. In an ideal world, hopefully, as the channel grows, my list of contacts and resources also grow. And I would love to put together a professional team of researchers, have a Peruvian archaeologist or a team of them to go out and investigate some of these places and document all of it. The other thing is, unfortunately, and this is in some of my videos, these sites are being there's a lot of things that are affecting the status of these sites, whether it's looting or the expansion of corporate agriculture. I mean, I went to sites that were completely wiped out because some company decided to put a system of growing asparagus or something like that. I mean, just wiped out completely.
Yeah.
I don't think they had, it's just an opinion, I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure they didn't have government permission to do that. The other thing is, even a lot of these companies make decisions that, all right, we'll get caught, we'll pay the fine. To them, paying the fine is more valuable than the historical patrimony or legacy of these sites. The problem is nobody really documents them, because there's so many in Peru also. So ideally, the channel really makes some headway and maybe starts working with some organizations where we can get the financial support and backing to be able to do some of these things. And I would love to do LIDAR surveys and geo mapping and provide all of that to the Peruvian government to say, hey, I know you wrote this thing down 100 years ago. Here's a 3D model of it to keep for your records. I'd love to work in those arenas. And so that would be the goal. And personally, they're finding stuff in Peru all the time. I mean, just this year, they found one of the oldest ceremonial temples on the coast in Ucupe, and that had artwork, that had religious iconography, which is pushing the date back of when religious iconography came to the coast. So there's still so much out there that just waiting to be discovered.
Hey, could you tell us a little bit about the geoglyph you think you found, and maybe a little bit about the Nazca lines and maybe the possible relation there?
So I mean, this was shocking to me. I'm still waiting to get in touch with the Peruvian archaeologists to know exactly what to do. And it's also been told that the Ministry of Culture has its hands full. So how much attention they would give these things, even if I give them coordinates, for example, is debatable. And so typically you can find geoglyphs kind of everywhere. I mean, there's geoglyphs here in the States, but predominantly you find the major influx of them down in the southern coastal deserts of Peru, in the Nazca and the Paracas cultures. And however, this set of geoglyphs that I found this was the first day I went. This was in the Norte Chico area. And so as far as we know, the Norte Chico are the oldest, culture in the Americas. Well, it's stone building culture.
Right.
And not known for their geoglyphs. And so I'm doing some research and I come across and I was like, this thing looks like a face. Like I can't not see it. It's pretty apparent. Other things, there's chances I'm just seeing things, but this was pretty apparent to me. But the fact that there were other things around it too, like these spirals, and on the other side of this little valley were also some more geoglyphs. I mean, I'm just putting two and two together. This isn't research. There's no samples to take or anything of that nature. But like, this is in an area where this culture existed. It's close to these places. It's probably from that culture. And so, what I don't like is that it's a little bit isolated. I'm not finding more of them around. But my barometer for that though is Nazca. All of a sudden I'm sitting here telling myself I should be finding more because I'm using Nazca as the reference. And that's probably an inappropriate reference to make. It was a completely separate culture. And so that, I believe, it warrants a bit more investigation. It was pretty, again, that was the first day I went, the first stopping point on my expedition in 2024. And so it was awesome to be able to put the drone up in the air. It's funny, I got there and I was like, I think these are the eyes, and I was like, let me put that. I was completely wrong. It was like way back over here. A lot of these places you don't see until you got something in the sky.
Yeah. Well, tell us about the video you did where you met the guy Luis, and you were looking.
Luis.
Yeah, that was fascinating to me with the elephant stone. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was my second day. So just to started off at the beginning, I saw these mounds, in this little alcove in this valley on Google Earth, and they were kind of isolated mounds. And so I was like, all right, that's I don't know. I've become pretty good at identifying these things.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess over time. But there's another thing too. An additional factor is like the alignments. Does it look like it's aligning to some sort of cardinal direction? And typically, when it comes to temples or pyramids, a lot of these ancient cultures would build their architecture aligned to the northeast, astronomical location, particularly because that's when the sun would
Solstice.
rise on the
Yeah,
solstice, right?
yeah.
And so that was another clue to me. I was like, all right, these are probably some pyramids. I'll go check them out. So I head to that area, and like you said, it's on the YouTube. The whole journey's on there. But then all of a sudden, I'm making it close, and then I come across this person. I'm live streaming on Instagram too at the same time, and he got a little shook. You can see
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can see it afterwards too. I was a little taken aback, but he was more shook because he thought, apparently living right there and tending to his fields, he's been robbed a bunch of times by local peoples in that area, and it seems to happen a lot. So he thought I was coming to rob him. He ended up saying, I looked at the time and I was like, they're coming very early this time. What's going on? But so I asked him. I told him where I was from, and I said, what's back here? And he just very casually said, the archaeological site of Caballete. I was like, oh, okay, do you mind if I go? Because it was on his property. And what a blessing Luis was to come across. I mean, this man dropped what he was doing and literally walked me throughout the entirety of that site. And even more than that, he was there because this was his property. He was there when archaeologists came and did a survey and did look
Okay.
at things and did
Yeah.
dig for things, and so he had all this information to provide about this site. And this site was a Norte Chico site. This was part of the Corral Supe culture. It was in an adjacent valley, and part of the way you can tell that one of the staples of that culture is they built these pyramid like temples with these circular plazas in front of them.
Mm.
And those were on 2 or 3 of the pyramids at this Caballete site. Anyway, I didn't see any Ministry of Culture designation. I would find out that it was difficult to find anything written on it. Somebody wrote on Instagram that they visited it as part of a tour when they were working in the field. But the fact, there's no major roads getting you there. You have to want to get there to really get there. And so it was a complete shock to come across. Even more than that was within one of the plazas, the circular plazas, were these stone monoliths. And Luis would tell me this is the only monolithic calendar system in the Norte Chico culture, which, it spans several valleys, which naturally would make it the if this was the culture, the oldest stone temple building culture in the Americas, this is likely the oldest stone monolithic calendar in the Americas, right there at the site. And I came
That's so
across it by
cool.
complete happenstance.
Wow. That's amazing. I love stories like that. Yep.
Well, the other thing too, he mentioned how at this one spot where I thought there was a sunken circular plaza, he said no, that's not a plaza, but there's a stone bench there made out of the bedrock. I was like, wait, it's there. He said, yeah, they came, they took pictures of it and covered it back up. And so sometimes at these locations, that's what the archaeologists will do. They'll dig to try to find some evidence of something, and then cover it back up for preservation and future investigations. But again, they're taking small samples from small areas. They're not doing a complete survey. And the other thing is, it costs money to have a ground penetrating radar survey of an entire site. And so that's another goal of the channel, is again to
Yeah.
either crowdsource or, we're going to need financial backing to do this stuff.
Yeah. Most of these archaeologists have stipends from universities and colleges and stuff to do that. And which I think it's really cool because I see this in just modern culture in general. I see this uh, flattening of academia. In other words, we, the plebes, so to speak, can become just as much experts in certain areas as these university trained people, and in some ways have a more open understanding because we don't have a vested interest. We have no skin in the game, so to speak. And that's why I think we see, in my opinion, a huge rise of archaeologists like you. And I think they should be supported because I think you're more likely to get to the truth. I'm not saying you don't have biases or anything, everybody does, but you're more likely to get to the truth. And I mean, I'm seminary trained, I love et cetera, et cetera. But there is an academic mafia, let's be honest. And if you're not in the inner circle sometimes, particularly if you come at it with new ideas that are not accepted ideas. So I think it's really awesome. So what would be the takeaways of what you're doing for the modern world?
Well, just to touch on what you're saying, what I found over time is archaeologists from other countries, for example, and like the rest of the world, aren't so hell bent on
Mm,
the certain timelines there's just a little bit more open mindedness, it seems. And so again, like I said earlier, I kind of want to bring the worlds together, because
mm,
I do think that there's something that both sides bring to the table. And when you were saying somebody coming in with it reminds me of there's a story about there's a truck that's going in a tunnel and it gets stuck because it's too big, and so it's stuck in the tunnel, and for hours nobody can figure out how to get it out. And then some janitor comes by and he's like, take the air out of the tires. And it's like, and you had all these people working on it, and then this guy
PhD.
just comes by, but it's just like that outside uninvested, for lack of a better word,
Yeah. Yeah.
someone who doesn't have any preconceived notions about the thing, and it almost makes me feel, and that's really where the wonder comes from too. And it's like with the wonder and the awe, this looks like that. Could there be a connection here?
Yeah.
And then to trace those. To answer your question, I believe that again at a lot of these sites, they were given a very, very quick once over with what they're finding with the footprints in white sands, and many other sites across the Americas, that human beings in our current evolutionary form were here a lot sooner than we thought. There's no reason to think that they weren't doing things or constructing things, or that there could be some remnants left out there of the cultures that once were. And that's why a site like Monteverde, though, is so unique, because it was in a bog situation. And that's the other thing, like a lot of this stuff, it might be difficult to find because we went through a big cataclysm at some
Yeah.
point.
An ice age. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of really affected things, and so might make it a little difficult to. And then not to mention, at least on the coast of Peru, not only is it on fault lines, but you'll get these massive El Nino storms that just and you'll get them to this day, that will wipe out entire settlements.
Oh,
And
wow.
every couple hundred years, there's like it's like a super El Nino, where it'll cause tsunamis, and coming off the Andes and going into the whole things are wiped away. And that's why a lot of these places that we start to uncover on the coast were abandoned, were straight up abandoned. And the thought is that these cultures then move up into the Andes Mountains a little further from the coast. Couple hundred years go by, and then they start to trickle back out to the coast, rebuild, sometimes at the prior, at a location that had already been started out.
Hmm.
Another mega El Nino happens. And then the process just, circulates again and again. Hopefully some of these technologies do make it a bit easier. But the other thing about it is you got to know where to look. It is a big world out there. You got to
Mm.
be kind of precise with these locations, and not to mention at some of these locations, I know for a fact, because of the pottery that's been left there and the remnants of the bones, there's a ton of things to learn. I can't stress, there are a ton of things to learn that are still buried, that you can find remains, you could find burials, you could find structures. I've seen them. I've seen them. We just need the investment, the backing, and the people and the manpower to make it happen.
Yeah. Now, you brought up an interesting point that I wanted to ask about or talk about a little bit. Is it seems like to me that you have, and this is as far as archaeological study, but this is any area. You have one group of people that they're new and they find new stuff, and then it gets encrusted, and then another generation comes along and wants to do different stuff, and then they persecute the generation afterwards. And this is archaeological orthodoxy, so to speak. And then I just think it's great that technology has not only given us tools to get into the site better and to see in the site and excavate, but technology has also given you the opportunity that everything's at your fingertips, from peer essays and studies, and everything's right here with technology. And it's fascinating how much you can just learn. And I don't like this terminology, but even as a layman, so to speak, in doing this, which I don't consider you a layman at all. But yeah, I have hopes that they're going to find out even more and more things. And I just wonder, if I'm not against Darwinism at all, I believe in an old Earth, but I just wonder if there's certain sacrosanct things about it that they're afraid are going to be dispelled by some new findings and stuff like that. That's just my speculation. So, but that could be every generation anyway. So tell us, what you have, any future projects or plans that you're working on, and then, if you will, give us your details, your deets, where people can find you.
Absolutely. I mean, for future projects, I'm still, as I plan a 2025 expedition, I am still editing footage from this 2024 expedition.
Yeah.
I did this one solo, and I managed to capture about 2 terabytes worth of video footage.
Wow.
So I'm still, now, to be fair, about a third of it is like unusable. I've been going through it. It's straight
That's
up
still a
because
lot, though.
I have the GoPro on my head and I'm so excited and I'm looking like, it's, you can't do anything with that particular footage. But I have a ton of more to present on some of these sites. And again, I think it's important because I didn't know about them. Most people don't know about them. They're not on maps. They're not easy places to get to, too.
Oh yeah, I saw you.
Unless you really want to get there.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing too. That it's part of the unsexy archaeology about these places. You got to camp out. You're going to be in environments that aren't too flattering for our creature comforts.
Not to mention snakes, like Louise.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You found the snake. Yes. Yep. So, again, I also want to document for all my mapping that I've done on Google Earth, I've gone to maybe 15% of what I have mapped out, these, uncharted locations. And so a goal is to professionally document these things, like with a film crew, maybe that's a hope. Because at least more than just me, these places deserve so much more than just me and a couple of GoPros and my drone. They deserve much more than that. And
Yeah.
hopefully I am able to find myself in a position where that becomes a reality and I'm able to do that. And I would also love to work with a local archaeologist and local indigenous cultures to, the mythology and the stories and the legends and the lore is something that I didn't capture all too much of it on this last expedition, but it's definitely a part of the goal. And I think that they're stories and voices that need to be heard, and they know so much more about these places than we ever will. And what happens when we lose them? We lose that connection to our past. And so I think it's important that there's some sort of mission to coalesce all of these things together. And I think doing it in Peru for the time being is a perfect combination of things in order to make that happen. And so you can find me on Instagram, Pillars of the Past, pillarsofthepast.com. We'll have links to all of these things, and Pillars of the Past 101 on YouTube.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. We barely went very deep, but just to meet you and to see what you're doing, and we want to put out there what you're doing. And I encourage everybody to go check out his stuff. It's great stuff, and let's get him funded and where he can really do what he desires to do and go deeper into the Peruvian mystery. So yeah,
I appreciate it.
So thanks so much, Raul, for being on our show.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, and we need to do it again sometime.
Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.